A frozen giant worth trillions, America's 150-year obsession. In 2019, a piece of news broke that sent shockwaves through the global diplomatic community. Then U.S. President Donald Trump made an official proposal to the Danish government. He wanted to buy Greenland. The media laughed. Most reactions were filled with ridicule, calling it the unconventional proposal of a former real estate mogul. But we need to look past the laughter and focus on the cold, hard numbers. This wasn't a one-off whim. The United States actually attempted to purchase Greenland back in 1867 and again in 1946. For over 150 years, the world's leading superpower has been obsessed with this barren land. Today, we're diving deep into the hidden story of why this massive island has become the front line of the global wealth war. America's dream of a second Alaska, the $7.2 million miracle. When people laughed at the proposal to buy Greenland, they forgot that history has a funny way of repeating itself. Exactly 150 years ago, America faced the same ridicule and changed the world forever. I'm talking about the Alaska Purchase of 1867. When U.S. Secretary of State William Seward bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, the American media was ruthless. They called the land Seward's icebox and mocked the deal as Seward's Folly. They claimed he had flushed taxpayer money down the toilet for a wasteland of snow and ice. At the time, Russia was financially crippled by the Crimean War. They feared that if war broke out with Britain, they wouldn't be able to defend Alaska, which sat right next to British-controlled Canada. To Russia, Alaska was a burden, unprofitable, and too expensive to protect. It sounds eerily similar to how some view Denmark's current situation, spending hundreds of millions in subsidies on Greenland every year. But as soon as the U.S. opened the lid of that icebox, the world was stunned. Just a few years later, the gold rush began. Then, in the 20th century, massive oil fields were discovered. A land bought for $7.2 million, worth only a few hundred million in today's dollars, transformed into an energy powerhouse worth trillions. Beyond the money, Alaska became the front line of defense against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Seward's Folly was suddenly re-evaluated as the genius of the century. This Alaska effect is exactly what drives the American obsession with Greenland. There is a deep-seated conviction: they laughed at the ice last time, and we hit the jackpot. If the glaciers melt, Greenland will be Alaska 2.0. Greenland is even larger than Alaska, and it holds the modern-day gold mines, rare earth elements, and the northern sea route. The vision William Seward had 150 years ago is being projected today on a much larger stage. When Alaska was purchased, the price was just 2 cents per acre. Today, while the price tag for Greenland has climbed into the hundreds of billions, from an economic perspective, it might still be the most undervalued blue-chip stock in history. Will Greenland be remembered as the second Alaska, or will it remain a lingering dream of a 51st state? History teaches us one thing: while the crowd sees only ice, those who see the gold beneath it are the ones who rule the next century. Erik the Red's great marketing scam. First, let's address the geographical puzzle. Greenland sits right next to the North American continent. Meanwhile, Denmark is thousands of miles away across the Atlantic in Europe. Based on physical distance alone, it would be natural for this land to belong to the U.S. or Canada. So why is the Danish flag flying there? It all started 1,000 years ago with a criminal's desperate life reversal project. In the year 982, a Norwegian Viking known as Erik the Red was exiled from Iceland after committing murder. With nowhere left to go, he sailed west and stumbled across a massive island. But there was a problem. It was nothing but ice. Erik quickly realized that he couldn't survive this harsh environment alone. He returned to Iceland and began recruiting followers. This is when he launched what might be the most successful false advertisement in human history. He told everyone, "I've found a rich and fertile land to the west, overflowing with greenery. I call it Greenland." Why was Erik so desperate to lure people there? It was a move based on cold economic calculation. First, he wanted to create his own economic ecosystem. As an outcast from society, he sought to build a new kingdom where he sat at the top of the food chain. Second, it was about economies of scale. Building homes, raising livestock, and hunting walruses to trade with Europe required a massive labor force. To Erik, settlers were labor capital and survival infrastructure. Finally, on a psychological level, he needed accomplices. By bringing hundreds of people to form a colony, he could rebrand his exile. It was no longer a tragedy or a punishment. It became a great pioneering expedition. How Denmark defied geography to keep this frozen giant. So how exactly did a Viking criminal settlement 2,000 miles away end up becoming a permanent part of the Danish kingdom? It began with a need for survival. Erik's descendants realized they couldn't endure the Arctic isolation without support, so they sought the protection of the Norwegian crown. But the real turning point came in 1397 with the formation of the Kalmar Union. This was a massive political alliance that united Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under a single monarch. Since the Danish royals were the true power brokers of this union, the administrative rights to Greenland quietly shifted into Danish hands. But history is rarely a smooth ride. Fast forward to 1814, the year the Napoleonic Wars reshaped Europe. Originally, Denmark tried to remain neutral, but in 1807, Great Britain, fearing the Danish fleet would fall into Napoleon's hands, launched a preemptive strike on Copenhagen. This brutal bombardment left the city in ruins and forced King Frederick VI into a desperate alliance with Napoleon Bonaparte. It was a gamble that didn't pay off. When Napoleon's empire began to crumble after his disastrous Russian campaign, Denmark found itself isolated and on the wrong side of history. By 1814, the coalition of victors were ready to carve up the map of Europe. Among those victors was Sweden. Having recently lost Finland to Russia, the Swedish crown prince, Charles XIV John, demanded Norway as compensation. Denmark, defeated and bankrupt, had no choice but to surrender its 400-year-old union with Norway. This brought them to the Treaty of Kiel. It should have been the end of the Danish Empire, but here is where the genius of Danish negotiators comes in. As they drafted the text to surrender the Kingdom of Norway to the Swedish king, they slipped in a tiny, crucial exception, excluding Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. At the time, Sweden was so focused on securing the Norwegian mainland that they viewed these remote, frozen territories as worthless. They signed the paper, not realizing they were letting a massive future strategic prize slip through their fingers. This single sentence changed history forever. Over a century later, in 1933, a newly independent Norway tried to reclaim parts of eastern Greenland. However, the Permanent Court of International Justice looked back at that very document from 1814. They ruled that because of those few words, Denmark's sovereignty was absolute. It remains one of the greatest diplomatic saves in history, proving that in the world of geopolitics, the pen is truly mightier than the sword.
The golden tether, the brutal price of holding Greenland. Greenland covers about 830,000 square miles, large enough to fit Texas 3 times over. Yet its entire population of 56,000 could fit inside a single sold-out Dodger Stadium. Sustaining this vast territory is an immense challenge. The Danish government provides an annual block grant of over $600 million, fueling nearly half of Greenland's public budget. But the real burden is just beginning. As of 2026, Denmark is pouring an additional $6.5 billion into Arctic defense. To Copenhagen, Greenland is a golden tether, too expensive to keep, yet too precious to let go. However, to justify these costs, Denmark has historically exacted a brutal price. In 1953, Denmark forcibly relocated the Inuit of Thule to expand a military base. Parallel to this, in 1951, the government initiated a social project where 22 Inuit children were taken to Denmark for cultural assimilation. Upon their return, these experiment children were unable to communicate in their native language, leading to a profound loss of cultural connection and a severing of ties with their families. The 1960s saw even more direct intervention. Driven by the logic of reducing welfare costs, Danish authorities launched the secret Coil campaign. Thousands of Inuit girls, some as young as 12, were implanted with IUDs without their consent or their parents' knowledge. This was a systematic attempt to limit the reproductive rights of a generation to balance a colonial budget. The Inuit people have consistently advocated for their sovereignty under the banner of Our Home. In 2025, the Danish Prime Minister officially apologized for the forced contraception campaign, acknowledging the state's responsibility. These historical traumas have now become the catalyst for a powerful independence movement, as Greenland seeks to redefine its relationship with Denmark beyond financial dependency. The 21st century Suez, the Arctic route revolution. For centuries, we've taken it for granted that 12% of global trade depends on a single, narrow choke point, the Suez Canal in Egypt. Before it opened in 1869, sailing from Europe to Asia meant embarking on a grueling journey around the southern tip of Africa. The Suez Canal became Earth's shortcut, serving as the absolute backbone of global economic power for the last 150 years. But this route has a fatal weakness. It's a narrow waterway, only 200 to 300 meters wide, where the world's largest container ships must line up to pass through. Do you remember the Ever Given incident in 2021? A giant ship got stuck sideways for just 6 days, and that brief paralysis vaporized $10 billion in global trade. When one canal in one country gets blocked, the world's supply chain collapses like a row of dominoes. This is the Suez risk. Now, let's look north. As climate change melts the Arctic ice, humanity is discovering a forbidden route that has been locked away for millennia. And the benefits of the Northern Sea Route replacing the Suez Canal aren't just about being a little faster. We are talking about a tectonic shift in global logistics. First, there's the staggering reduction in distance. To get from Busan in South Korea to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, the heart of Europe, via the Suez Canal, a ship must travel about 22,000 kilometers. But by cutting through the Arctic Ocean, that distance drops to just 15,000 kilometers. That's a 40% reduction. In economic terms, a 40% shorter distance means 40% less spent on fuel. It means a drastic cut in labor costs and ship depreciation. Most importantly, it increases the number of round trips a single vessel can make in a year, causing the productivity of shipping companies to skyrocket. Second, we have the issue of political stability. To pass through the Suez Canal, ships must navigate the Gulf of Aden, notorious for piracy, and the volatile powder keg of the Middle East. Shipping companies pay massive insurance premiums and often hire private security just to get through these waters. The Arctic route, by contrast, is relatively free from such geopolitical strife. It's a journey through a quiet, frozen sea, far from pirates and terror threats. Furthermore, the Arctic Ocean is a massive treasure chest in its own right. It is estimated to hold 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas and 13% of its undiscovered oil. If the Northern Sea Route becomes the new standard, Greenland becomes more than just a landmark. It becomes the world's most strategic gas station and control tower, sitting right in the middle of this energy highway. During the Age of Discovery, nations that controlled the Cape of Good Hope or the Strait of Malacca monopolized the world's wealth. Today, whoever holds the keys to the Arctic route will hold the logistical hegemony of the 21st century. This is the real reason the U.S. offered hundreds of billions of dollars to buy Greenland. It's also why, when Chinese capital tried to penetrate Greenland by building airports and ports, the U.S. stepped in aggressively, declaring it a matter of national security. From an economic perspective, the Suez Canal is a legacy monopoly. The Arctic route is the disruptive innovation that breaks that monopoly. And Greenland is the massive continent standing at the very center of this revolution. Until now, we viewed Greenland as just a remote, frozen island. But when you factor in the flow of logistics and the value of its resources, it is the hottest economic heartbeat of the 21st century. While some see melting glaciers and fear an environmental crisis, the world's power brokers are moving silently to claim the golden route opening beneath that ice.
The fortress of resources, treasures beyond black gold. The oil and natural gas I mentioned earlier, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If Greenland were simply oily land, President Trump wouldn't have been so quick to pull out his checkbook. The real war is being fought much deeper underground. It's a war over strategic minerals and rare earth elements. Regions like Kvanefjeld in southern Greenland are estimated to hold some of the largest rare earth deposits on the planet. They aren't called rare because they are hard to find. They are rare because extracting them is incredibly difficult and environmentally risky. But in modern civilization, they are absolutely irreplaceable. From the powerful magnets and a Tesla motor to the high-resolution display on your iPhone, even the catalysts that purify the water we drink. Without rare earths, modern life as we know it would grind to a halt. Currently, China controls nearly 90% of this supply chain, which is a significant strategic challenge for the United States. Greenland is the only exit strategy that can wake America up from that nightmare. The core of the energy transition is the battery, and to build batteries, you need minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel. As Greenland's glaciers melt, the exposed rock is revealing a literal fountain of this white petroleum. The reason the U.S. government reopened its consulate in Greenland and is maintaining such close contact is crystal clear. They need to secure a clean supply chain for electric vehicles, one that China can't touch. Greenland isn't just an energy provider, it is the womb of raw materials where all future technology is born. But it's not just about what's in the ground. Look at the map again. Together with Iceland and the UK, Greenland forms the GI-UK gap, the gateway to the North Atlantic. If a Russian nuclear submarine wants to reach the Atlantic, it has to pass through this choke point. When you combine one of the world's largest rare earth mines with this strategic location, Greenland becomes a massive shield protecting U.S. security and an economic goose that lays golden eggs. While we were calling Greenland a block of ice, China and Russia were calling it the Pearl of the Arctic, quietly investing billions. In the end, Greenland is the final chapter of the 21st century resource war. Its value, starting with oil and culminating in rare earths, has moved beyond a simple price tag. It is a question of who will dictate the standards of the future. As the ice continues to melt, the final desires of humanity hidden beneath it are burning hotter than ever. The invisible strategic tug-of-war, the 2026 Arctic Chessboard. But here's the real question. Why is the United States in such a hurry? The answer lies in the invisible holes that China and Russia are trying to drill into Greenland's defense.
Just recently, in January 2026, the White House released a cryptic image on social media. It showed a dog sled at a crossroads, forced to choose between the US on one side and the China-Russia alliance on the other. This wasn't just a meme. Greenland has officially become the hottest battlefield for global superpowers. Look at China. They've rebranded themselves as a near-Arctic state, knocking on Greenland's door with massive checkbooks. They offered to build 3 new airports and invest in rare earth mines. On the surface, it's just business, but to Washington, this looks like a polar Silk Road, a strategic foothold where Chinese warships could one day dock. This is why the US stepped in and pressured Denmark to cancel these Chinese contracts. It was about cutting off Beijing's economic reach before it could even start. Russia is being even more direct. They've rebuilt Soviet-era military bases and now operate the world's largest fleet of icebreakers. For Russian submarines, the GIUK Gap, the waters right off Greenland's coast, is the only gateway to the Atlantic. President Trump's rhetoric has reached a boiling point. In a recent press gaggle, he mocked Greenland's defense, famously saying, basically their defense is 2 dog sleds. He warned that if the U.S. doesn't secure ownership and title of the island, Russia or China will move in one way or the other. He's even suggested that if negotiations fail, the U.S. is prepared to pursue alternative strategic measures to ensure continental security. While Denmark and the EU condemn these statements as imperialistic and a violation of sovereignty, the U.S. stance is unwavering. In their eyes, it's better to pay a premium or even risk a diplomatic crisis than to allow a rival's flag to fly in their own backyard. Greenland is no longer just a remote island, it is a shortcut for some and a final fortress for others. This is the essence of the struggle, a desperate race to ensure that the 1% chance of a rival's entry is sealed shut forever.